Welcome to another episode of Mike's Money Picks. Today on the podcast, we're going to be breaking down the Thursday, January 4th slate for college basketball DFS on DraftKings and Fanduel. We've got a nice little 6-game slate going on that is going to be kind of the norm for Thursday nights in the future if I'm being a little predictive here, because normally that is when the Pac-12 plays a lot of their conference games, and you look at this slate and it is predominantly Pac-12 games. So if you want to, wait out to see how your lineups did, you're probably going to have to wait into the wee hours of the morning if you're on the East Coast, because these Pac-12 games can get pretty late. So we are back after kind of a day break. The Wednesday slate, I didn't have a chance to record a video. I mentioned here on the podcast before, I am a high school teacher and football coach. And so Monday night, I spent, I was up watching the Texas game till 1 a.m. because that game started at 9 a.m. for no reason, or 9 p.m. for no reason. So yesterday I was a little tired and I did not have time to do all the requisite research. And so, when it got time to record late at night, I just didn't have the research, didn't have the energy in me to stay up and do it. So I went to bed a little early, with today being the first day that I was back at school. And so there was no episode for the Wednesday slate, but we're back here for the Thursday slate for you. Hoping to be back for the Friday and Saturday slate as well. So make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube as well as to the audio feed as well. That way you can be notified when new episodes drop. We are now over 300 subscribers on YouTube. So the next milestone is 400. And I would really appreciate if you guys would help me get there. Hit that subscribe button. It costs nothing. It helps me out a ton. And I cannot appreciate it more. You guys are the best community. We've, started the YouTube page in June, and to now be over 300 subscribers, I think that's actually a decent milestone, and I really want to keep it going. So let's see if we can get to 400. All right, so that kind of does it for the introduction here. Don't really have a whole lot else to add. So let's go ahead and dive into game one of the night. Michigan State taking on Penn State. All right, so if you are new to us for this college basketball season, we've kind of changed the way we've done these college basketball previews a little bit. I am going to go game by game, almost more like it is an NFL or a college football slate, and just kind of going through, my favorite plays from each game, how I would attack each game, and how I expect each game to play out. This will help if you're playing Showdown DFS for some of these games, as well as kind of, especially on a smaller slate, give you different angles to attack and different ways to kind of build lineups. I think that this season so far, with a lot of the way that a lot of the top teams in college basketball have played, building around game stacks has been a very successful strategy for building DFS lineups. So this is the way that we've been doing it. This way we're going to keep doing it. So game one is Penn State at Michigan State. KenPom has this one projected to finish as Michigan State 79-65. This is the most lopsided point spread of the slate, according to KenPom, at 14. Penn State is tied for the lowest scoring team of the slate at 65 points. So on the Penn State side, with them being one of the lowest scoring teams on the slate, can you play any Penn State guys? I think the answer is actually yes. Kanye Clary, his price tag has gone way up. He's $8,600 now, which is the highest he's been all season, but I think it is well warranted. He has seen a big time usage jump in his last 5 games, which is important because that is the exact moment that Penn State started conference play with that conference opener against Maryland. And in those last 5 games, he's been over 35 fantasy points 4 out of 5 times. So he's definitely a guy that you can go to, and the usage numbers back it up. He has had no fewer than a 27% usage rate in each of his last 5 games. So if you think that Penn State keeps this one close a little bit, it's probably going to be because of Kanye Clary and just all the usage, all the shots that he's been attempting. Now, another guy that is worth monitoring, and this guy gets dual eligibility, he's really easy to fit into a lineup, is Puff Johnson, younger brother of Cam Johnson of the North Carolina Tar Heels and now the Brooklyn Nets. He's been pretty solid for Penn State. He's been over 22 fantasy points in 3 straight games. He's only $5,100 on DraftKings. Even if they lose this game and lose it pretty big, I think he could still give you some decent value just because of how many minutes he is playing, how many shots he is taking, and the cheap price tag that he is at. And then Nick Kern Jr. is questionable for this game against Penn State. He missed the last one, and what you saw was DeMarco Dunn saw a little bit of a boost in minutes and in usage for that. Dunn's been a pretty solid value as well, so he's another guy that I think you can consider for Penn State. I probably wouldn't play too many Penn State guys with them only being implied or projected 65 points, but I definitely think there are individual pieces that could be pretty solid value plays. On the Michigan State side, Tyson Walker is a guy I play a lot. on DraftKings. Just going to be honest. And it's because of just his insane usage rate and shot rates. Like if you look at the game log, aside from the game against Southern Indiana at the start of the season, and I believe he hurt his ankle in that game, he hasn't attempted fewer than 12 shots in a game since. He's going to have the ball in his hands. He's going to give you multiple rebounds and assists as well, in addition to all those shots that he's taking. And when he gives you an efficient shooting night, then he's going to give you a solid fantasy performance. So he's a guy that I play a lot. I think that the bar of only $8,000 is, means that 32 points would be 4 times value. That's really attainable. And we've seen him have legitimate 50 fantasy point upside with that season opening performance against James Madison, where he had 56, and then against Baylor a few Saturdays ago where he had 47. So a lot of upside for Tyson Walker because of how many shots and how much usage he gets. Now, the other guy from Michigan State that I'm interested in is Malik Hall. Look, he's not a consistently good player, but he can be a good player on any given night. In 2 of the last 5 games, he's had over 37 fantasy points. And that is incredible upside for a guy that's only $5,900. I think if you're playing GPPs, he's got to be on your radar just because of that upside that he gives you. But he really isn't super consistent. You never really know when he's going to pop off. I don't think Penn State is like super good on the interior in terms of their defending. So maybe this could be an opportunity for Malik Hall to pop off again. AJ Hogard is another guy that I am going to mention. I think he would be a pivot off of Tyson Walker. If you are somebody who is fading Tyson Walker, then playing AJ Hogard might be worth a while. He's had over 30 fantasy points in 3 straight. And if Tyson Walker isn't the one shooting, it's probably going to be AJ Hogard. Now, on to game 2, which is Minnesota at Michigan, the second Big Ten tilt of the night. This one, according to KenPom, is projected to be Minnesota 79-74. And y'all, there's a lot of high-scoring games on this slate. So that total, on some 10-game slates might rank as like the second or third highest. On this one, it is still the third highest total on this slate. So definitely a lot of juicy games that you can target on this one. And really, there's a few games that you could just cross off if you wanted to. So for this one, Minnesota has become a really easy team to target in DFS because they are essentially playing a 7-man rotation at this point. And that is Garcia, Hawkins, Mitchell, Payne, Christie, Ola Joseph, and Enan. One thing that is expected, though, they are expected to get Braden Carrington back for this game. He's been on like a mental health leave and hasn't played since December 9th, but they are expected to get him back for this game. He's a guy that if you told me he was going to come in and instantly play 25 minutes, I'd be pretty interested. But I just don't know. I would expect them to ease him back into it and not see a high minute total. And so those top 7 still should see plenty of opportunity for Minnesota. Now, with them only being a 7-man rotation, to me, that makes them a very easy team to stack. And they're a team that's implied to score 79 points in this game. So they're a team that's definitely worth stacking. So if you're going to stack, how would you build it? Well, I think you got to start with Elijah Hawkins. He averages 7.8 assists per game, and he has the 5th highest assist rate in the country, according to KenPom. He has a game this season where he had 17 assists against IUPUI. That's the upside that he gives you with those assists. And if he adds a little bit of scoring with it, then he's going to give you a pretty solid fantasy performance. He's been over 35 fantasy points in 3 straight and 4 out of his last 5 games. So really solid option there, Elijah Hawkins. And I think any Minnesota stack has to start with him. Mike Mitchell Jr. and Cam Christie have also been really solid lately in these games for Minnesota. They've gotten a lot more shots. They have gotten other ways to contribute in rebounding and whatnot just because they're playing a ton of minutes and they've been important pieces to this team. But the wild card for Minnesota is going to be Dawson Garcia. He is their best player, no doubt about it. And he is back from injury now. He missed, I believe it was 3 games. And he was back in the main game and he played 28 minutes and he didn't really do a whole lot in that game. But like I said, when he's healthy, he is their best player. So the question becomes does Garcia eat into the decent performances that we've seen from Mitchell and Christie in the last few weeks? I think it's certainly a possibility. And so I think if you're building out a Minnesota stack, I think you can go the route of Hawkins and then either Mitchell or Christie, or you could go Hawkins and Garcia if you wanted to go a little bit more expensive. Speaking of expensive, Michigan has a few guys that are expensive as well that I actually really like. Memphis only played 8 guys double-digit minutes in their last game, so they're another team that because of their short rotation, they're a little easier to target. Now, everything for the Memphis offense still runs through Olivier Nkamwa, the Tennessee transfer, and Doug McDaniel, their point guard. These two guys are the only two guys on the team for Michigan who have over a 20% usage rate, and both of them are over a 24% usage rate on the season. With the fact that everything goes through those two guys and they're projected to score 74 points, I think it's very easy to just go ahead and grab one or two of them. Now, if you were playing GPPs, I do think you have to consider Terrace Reed Jr. He is their starting center, and he has some legitimate upside. There was a stretch where he had 3 games over 28 fantasy points in a row. I do think you have to consider Namari Burnett, the Alabama transfer, as well. He's shown us some upside earlier this season. He has 4 total games over 28 fantasy points. So if you were looking to pivot off of Nkamwa and McDaniel, Reed and Burnett would be the two guys that I would be doing that with personally. I think Will Shetter is also an interesting play. He tends to have his best games when Terrace Reed gets in foul trouble. So if you think Dawson Garcia has a good performance, that might likely mean that Terrace Reed Jr. is going to be in foul trouble. And so that would also mean an opportunity. I think you could see a little bit of correlation between playing Dawson Garcia on the Minnesota side and Will Shetter on the Michigan side, because that would imply that Terrace Reed Jr. would be in foul trouble and Shetter would be getting those minutes. Third game of the night is going to be North Texas taking on Wichita. This one is projected to be North Texas 66 to 65, according to KenPom. Yes, you heard that correctly, 66 to 65. That is the lowest total of the day by 13 points. And on a 6-game slate, I think you could just take a big red X and just cross through this game entirely, because this is not going to be a good game environment. Because North Texas ranks 360th in the nation in adjusted tempo, according to KenPom, and there's only 362 teams in the country. So they are one of the slowest teams in the country. They are really good defensively. Wichita is really good defensively on the other side. So there's just not really going to be a whole lot of scoring in this one. And I think you can just cross this game off entirely. Now, for North Texas, Aaron Scott and Reuben Jones both fill up the stat sheet in a variety of ways. But the problem is that the game environments that they play in prevent them from having really any kind of ceiling. Like, you don't ever see these 35, 40 fantasy point performances out of Scott and Jones. And so I'm kind of out on them for that reason. I don't think the game environment is going to allow them to get those high totals. And at their price tags of 6,300 and 7,000, they're going to need a better game environment to get to value for their current salary. So I'm just kind of out on them, but they kind of are North Texas's 2 best players. The guy that I would kind of buy into would be Jason Edwards. He does lead the team in shot rate, and he does actually have some decent performances on the season. He's had 2 games over 27 fantasy points, and at $5,700, that's a lot more attainable for him to get back to 27 fantasy points than, when he's at like $7,000 and you would need him to get to 28 fantasy points just to get to 4 times value. So I definitely think in terms of a price adjusted play, Jason Edwards is probably my favorite guy on this North Texas roster. Now, they do have one wild card though, and that is Rondell Walker. So Rondell Walker was a 2-time transfer who just got his eligibility from the NCAA. He's played in 2 games since. Played in 14 minutes and 9 minutes, had 15.75 fantasy points against UT Arlington. And at $3,500 for a guy that arguably in terms of his talent is one of the better players on this team, I could kind of see playing him in a GPP just as a flyer, because at $3,500, he does not need a whole lot to hit value. Now, on the Wichita side, again, it's going to be tough sledding for Wichita because of how slow of a pace and how good of a defensive team North Texas is. So the game environment is going to make it really hard for any of them to hit value. What we have seen through this season, though, is that their 2 kind of highest usage guys are Xavier Bell as well as Kenny Poto. And both of those guys have had big-time performances this season, big-time ceiling performances this season. Both of them have had over 40 fantasy points in a game. And so maybe, just maybe, if you're, hoping that maybe one Wichita guy has a ceiling game, I would bet on it being Poto or Bell. Now, for the rest of their roster, Dalen Rignall, there's no T there, is a guy that I like a lot. When I watch Wichita play, like, he looks good. I don't really know how to explain it. I just think he's one of their better players, and he doesn't always play a whole lot of minutes, so he's not super reliable. He's not super consistent, but he looked really good against Kansas. He had 31 fantasy points, went for 13.7 boards, and 5 total blocks and steals. So definitely a guy that is going to be on my radar going forward, but probably not in this game environment. And then Wichita also did get 2 guys that kind of just got eligible also. It was Ronnie DeGray, who didn't really do a whole lot against Kansas at all. And then also Bijan Cortez, an Oklahoma transfer, who is listed as questionable for this game. If Bijan Cortez is active, I kind of get playing him as well. Like at Oklahoma, I never thought he was like super good, but he was a guy that when he was on the floor, he would make good decisions. He'd get you assists. He'd hit an open three. Like he's a guy that could very easily get to value at a price tag of only $3,600 if he is in fact active. All right, that does it for the first 3 games of this slate. Let's go ahead and take a quick breather, and then let's break down the last 3. Now, before we break down the second half of games, I do want to mention there are some places where you can get more information from me. First off, you can follow me on Twitter, otherwise known as X, at Mike's Money Picks. I do my best to tweet out the DFS rundown for every college basketball slate, where I highlight just kind of my favorite categorical plays in the night of college basketball, as well as if there's ever any updates to the show in terms of when episodes are going to come out, what platforms are going to come out on. I do try to tweet those out also. And then I'm more than happy to answer any DFS lineup or star sit questions on Twitter if you reach out to me. But I'm also in the Fantasy Corner Discord. Link is in the description on YouTube as well as on the audio feed. Fantasy Corner Discord is a lot of smart people who play a lot of DFS. I'm talking college basketball, NBA, NFL, golf, and we're just basically chatting up in there all day long, building lineups, talking strategy, and then sweating it out together when the night comes. And it's just a lot of fun. It's a great community to be part of. If you're looking for people to talk about DFS with, I cannot recommend it enough because that's part of the fun of it, right? And then lastly, I do write an article for my Patreon every single day where I highlight my core plays as well as kind of my attack strategy and lineup building for the slate. I'm not going to sit here and promise that you're just going to read it and instantly win thousands of dollars playing GPPs. It's not that easy, but I can promise that I give out good, sound information that can give you some ideas and help you build better lineups for college basketball because there's not a whole lot of people out there doing that. And then lastly, if you're looking to try something new this college basketball season, I know some states had some laws changing on January 1st as it pertains to online gambling. Head on over to signupexpert.com/Mike's Picks. What they do at SignUpExpert, we are partnering with them, and they get you the best offers and promo codes for new users at any kind of DFS, player prop, and sportsbook site that is available in your state. So if you're looking to try something new, go get yourself that best offer and promo code. It's signupexpert.com/Mike's Picks. All right, now let's go ahead and talk about the fourth game of the night, which is going to be Oregon taking on Washington. This one is pretty darn intriguing in my opinion. It's projected to be Washington 79-75. You have 2 teams that play at a decently fast tempo, and you have 2 teams that aren't exactly elite at the defensive end. So for Oregon, they have dealt with a lot of injuries this season. They've got Nafali Dante questionable. They've got Nate Biddle out, Jesse Zarzuela out. Just a lot of injuries. Keyshawn Bartholomew missed a few games as well. So just a lot of injuries for the Oregon team. But what you've seen happen as the season has gone on is they have built more around Kwame Evans Jr. and Jackson Shellstad. Like their usage rates are trending upward. Their fantasy scoring is trending upward. And in a game where Washington isn't elite defensively, and in a game where, there's going to be plenty of points scored, I don't mind going with Kwame Evans or Jackson Shellstad because those do appear to be Oregon's 2 guys from here to the rest of the season. Cousinard is their point guard. He kind of was their guy, but you're seeing more usage go by way of Shellstad as the season goes on. Cousinard still has some upside, though. He did have 48 fantasy points 3 games ago against Kent State. Now, in terms of value, I think Keyshawn Bartholomew can provide some kind of value. He was a lot better this season before he got injured. Since he has came back from injury, though, against USC and UCLA, he hasn't played more than 16 minutes in a game, hasn't scored more than 12 fantasy points in a game. So I do think there's some upside there, but it comes down to whether or not you want to be early or late on Keyshawn Bartholomew. Brandon Rigsby I also think could be an interesting value play. This game is, projected to feature over 150 total points scored. You got a guy who generally plays a decent amount of minutes. I think he could be worth a little bit of intrigue in this game also on the Oregon side. But the Washington side has a lot of interest from me. Even though, they're not the highest projected team of the slate, I think this would be one of the easier teams to stack on the slate because they run a lot of their stuff through Keon Brooks. And for whatever reason, he hasn't really seen his price tag go back up to what it was near the start of the season, and he's been playing just as good. Like he averages almost 35 fantasy points per game, and his salary is only $7,700. I think he's a really easy play. He's also had a really big shot rate. He's taken at least 12 shots in his last 5 games. Now, Xavier Wheeler is the point guard for Washington, and so if you're looking to stack this game up, Wheeler would be the guy that I would prefer to stack it with. He's shown the ability to have a high ceiling with 44 fantasy points against Seattle, and he generally takes a lot of shots as well. The problem is that he hasn't made a whole lot of them. He hasn't shot any better than 33% in either of his last 3 games. And so if you do get a good shooting night out of Xavier Wheeler, he can give you a really, really good performance. Frank Kepnang is listed as questionable for this one. He did not play in their last game against Utah. In fact, I believe it's now 2 games total that he has missed. In his place, Moses Wood has been in the starting lineup, and Wood has played a ton of minutes, but he hasn't really done a whole lot with it in terms of fantasy production. But if Kepnang continues to be out and you're looking to do a game stack, you can go ahead and get yourself a guy that's going to be on the floor in Moses Wood. Paul Mulcahy is a guy that I keep playing, and he kind of keeps breaking my heart, but I kind of still keep playing him just because at the start of the season, he was really good for this Washington team. But he hasn't topped 17 fantasy points in his last 5 games. His minutes total has been just kind of hovering around the 20 to 25 mark. And I kind of think that the quality player that we saw at the start of the season is still in there somewhere. And so, I might keep going back to Mulcahy, but he has continued to break my heart over this little stretch that he's been in. Now, and the sad part is that Mulcahy's production hasn't really gone to anybody else on a consistent basis. Corin Johnson has shown flashes of being that guy at only $5,500, but he hasn't been really all that consistent. So I definitely think that this is a game, this Oregon-Washington game, where you can definitely go ahead and get yourself 2 or 3 pieces from this game, and they're not super expensive, so you can definitely find enough value to fill that out, even if you go get the most expensive guys from this game. Colorado at Arizona has the highest game total of the night. It is projected to be 86 to 77 in favor of Arizona, according to KenPom. That gives Arizona the highest team total of the night. Now, on the Colorado side, Colorado is no slouch. KJ Simpson is their best player, and he will continue to be their best player. He has 4 straight games over 40 fantasy points. I think in terms of all the high-priced options on the slate, he is the absolute best one. Tristan Da Silva is their big man, and he is currently listed as questionable for this game. It's an ankle injury, and you don't want to rush back big guys in ankle injuries. So I don't necessarily know if Da Silva is going to play in this game. I would probably lean on the side of betting on no, that he doesn't play in this game. And so if he doesn't, what happened last game was Colorado just played their starting 5 an insane amount of minutes. And it was KJ Simpson, Julian Hammond, Javon Hadley, Luke O'Brien, and Eddie Lampkin Jr. as the starting 5. And they all played over 30 minutes, which is saying a lot because Eddie Lampkin is a big fella and he doesn't move all that well. So for him to play 30 minutes, that's pretty impressive, honestly. And so kind of it makes them a whole lot easier to target, but what ended up happening was no one on the Colorado side really went off in that game except for KJ Simpson. And so maybe with a better game environment, with them scoring a little more points, could that lift up some of the other Colorado guys? I think that's definitely a possibility. One guy to keep an eye on is going to be Javon Ruffin. He was a freshman last year for Colorado who got hurt near the end of the season, and he's a pretty solid player, and he was pretty good last year at least. And they kind of have eased him into the lineup. They played him 6 minutes in his first game against Washington, 15 minutes against Washington State. If his minutes continue to ramp up, he's going to be an intriguing play at only $3,800. I think there's a lot of guys that are in the 3K range this week that are worth a GPP dart throw, and I think that Javon Ruffin would probably be at the top of the list for that, in my opinion. Now, on the Arizona side, we mentioned how they are the highest projected scoring team of the slate. Here's one thing you have to keep in mind when you look at their game logs as well as their salaries is that they have played three weird games in a row. They haven't played a normal game in like a month. And what I mean by that is against FAU, they went to double overtime. They blew out Cal. They were up 30 like 10 minutes into the game, which was weird. And then they got blown out by Stanford in their last game, which kind of came out of nowhere. Stanford had a really hot shooting night. Arizona did not, and they got just boat raced in that game. So we haven't really seen like a competitive, close, regulation finish game out of Arizona in a long time. And so that's something to keep in mind when you look at their game logs. Now, in terms of the guys that I like for Arizona, Caleb Love is starting to turn back into the Caleb Love we knew him at when he was in Carolina, where he took a lot of shots, some of them ill-advised, didn't get a lot of assists, didn't really spread the ball around as much as he should. He hasn't had a game with more than one assist in his last four, but if he's going to be taking all the shots, that's going to give him a lot of fantasy upside, and I think he's certainly in play at $7,900, but he wouldn't be my favorite play at $7,900. Umar Ballo is my favorite play from this Arizona team, though. I think he is better than Kashad Johnson, their other big, and I think he's better than Eddie Lampkin. I think he will give Eddie Lampkin a lot of issues in this game. And so if we can get a normal game flow out of Umar Ballo, then we can end up with a lot of fantasy points. Like, I mentioned how they haven't played a quote-unquote normal game. Well, you go look at his game log, played 28 minutes against Wisconsin, had 38.75 fantasy points. Played 34 minutes against FAU, had 50.75 fantasy points. When he plays a full minute load, he is a really good, really productive player. And so Umar Ballo is a guy that I'm definitely going to be rostering at $7,300. Now, the other guys that I like on this Arizona team, Pelly Larson is a guy that plays a lot of minutes. He's a good shooter. He distributes the ball well. No complaints about playing him. And then Kylan Boswell has kind of been a victim of game flow in the last two games, only scoring a combined 21.5 fantasy points in the last two games. But I think he has a nice little get back game in this one. Again, kind of like Umar Ballo, when you look back at the competitive games that they've played, he's been better and he's played more consistent minutes and had more consistent usage. Now, the Utah and Arizona State game is the last game of the night, and it's an intriguing one. Like, it's an hour and a half later than the rest of the games on the slate, which I always kind of don't like when DraftKings does because it just leaves that as like an island game, and it's not really fun to sweat it out, in my opinion. But I kind of like this game, and I'm kind of glad they included it. So it is projected to be Utah 78-71, according to KenPom. For Arizona State, that's actually a pretty respectable total. When you look at the reason why this game is projected so high, it's because of their tempo ratings. Arizona State ranks 59th, Utah ranks 61st. So both these teams like to get up and down and will push the tempo, and I think that's going to help this one a little bit. For Arizona State, one thing that interests me is Sean Phillips Jr. He is their starting center. He is a legit 7-footer. They kind of haven't really played him a whole lot since he returned from injury. Hasn't played more than 11 minutes in the two games that he returned from injury, but they're going to need him in this game. Utah starts two 7-footers. He is the only size whatsoever that Arizona State has. Sean Phillips is going to be needed to play big minutes if they want to win this game. The other two guys that I have interest on the Arizona State side, though, Frankie Collins is their season-long usage leader and, in my opinion, their best player. He has a legitimate ceiling. He scored 44 fantasy points against Cal in their last game. No complaints playing Frankie Collins whatsoever. Adam Miller is the other guy I'm interested in. So I mentioned how Frankie Collins is the usage leader on the season. Well, Adam Miller is slowly creeping up on that. He is one of those two-time transfers that got eligible a few weeks ago. He's only played in 4 games. He's been over 25 fantasy points in 2 of them. He's played over 25 minutes in all 4 of those games. He's taken 9 or more shots in all 4 of those games. In fact, he's taken 6 or more 3-pointers in all 4 of those games. So Adam Miller is a guy that when he's out there is going to have the ball in his hands. He's going to be shooting it. And, in a game where it can definitely get up and down, at only $5,500, Adam Miller makes a lot of sense. Now, you could play the other guys for Arizona State like Perez, Neal, Gaffney. They all played a lot of minutes, but I'm just not super intrigued by them. When you look at the usage numbers, when you expect Sean Phillips to play more minutes in this game, which I do, then that definitely makes them less appealing. And I'm kind of going to be focusing my Arizona State exposure around Collins, Miller, and Phillips. Now, on the Utah side, Brandon Carlson is a guy we got to talk about. He's $8,800 on DraftKings, but he's had 53.75 and 49 fantasy points in his last 2 games. Those were the first 2 conference games for Utah. So they have shown that in 2 conference games, they're going to play him a ton of minutes, even when they're up, and they're going to run their offense through Brandon Carlson, their 7-footer. And I think he's pretty good. I think $8,800 is a very reasonable price tag. I think you definitely have to consider him for your lineups. And I think he's probably my second favorite high-priced option on the slate behind KJ Simpson, in my opinion. For the rest of the Utah guys, though, Raleigh Worcester and Gabe Madsen are super consistent options. If you're playing cash games in DFS, I think they're guys you have to consider. They play a ton of minutes. They're good shooters. They're good distributors of the basketball. I would have no complaints about playing either of them. I do question their ceiling, but they're both just solid plays. Another guy that I'm really interested in from the Utah side, though, is Keba Keita. Look, if you're going to fade Brandon Carlson, you might as well play Keba Keita. He's another 7-footer that they have coming off of the bench, and he is a really good points per minute guy. He played 21 minutes against Washington State and had 43 fantasy points in that game. So if you are fading Carlson, go ahead and roster his backup, play Keba Keita, and he has a legitimate 40-point upside. I'm also really interested in, for Utah, Davon Smith. So Davon Smith is another one of these two-time transfers that just got eligibility. He came over from Georgia Tech, and he was Georgia Tech's best player last season, if I'm being honest. And I don't necessarily think he's going to step in and ever be the Utes' best player. That would be Brandon Carlson. But he's looked pretty good for Utah when he's been out there. His minutes total has increased since conference play started, averaging 23 minutes in those two conference games, averaging 25 fantasy points in those two conference games. So I really do like Davon Smith. I think that his stock is going to continue to trend upward. He can fill up the stat sheet in a variety of ways, which, makes it's a wider pathway to scoring fantasy points when you can get points, rebounds, assists, and steals, as opposed to a guy who is just scoring or just rebounding. So I really do like Davon Smith as a value at $5,400. All right, that does it for all 6 Thursday night games, and that does it for our episode here tonight. So if you like what you saw on YouTube, please hit the like button. If you like what you heard on audio, please rate and review the audio feed. It really does help me out a lot, y'all. I promise it does not fall on deaf ears, and it really helps the videos and the podcast get noticed, helps me grow the community, and I really do appreciate it. If you want more information from me, you can find me on Twitter at Mike's Money Picks. Fantasy Corner Discord link is in the description. Articles are on the Patreon, patreon.com/Mike's Money Picks. So yeah, that pretty much does it for this episode, y'all. Like I said, I hope to be back for the Friday slate as well as the Saturday slate. It's going to depend on the timing of when DraftKings gets their games and salaries out, and how much I am able to research it, because I do pretty much have to do these podcasts before I go to bed at night, or else I'm just not going to have time to do it, just with how my schedule works out. So if DraftKings is able to get these slates out early, then I will be able to get these episodes recorded and get them out to you guys. Hopefully I was able to give you guys a lot of good information here on this show that can help you guys build successful DraftKings and FanDuel lineups for the Thursday night slate. And like I said, hopefully we're going to be able to keep it going all season. So if this is your first time here for college basketball, make sure you hit that subscribe button. That way you'll be notified when new episodes drop, because pretty much with college football being in its twilight and the NFL being in its twilight, we are a primarily college basketball and golf podcast for the next few months. So if you hit that subscribe button, you will be here for the rest of college basketball season, all the way up until that national championship game. All right, that does it for this episode, y'all. So thank you guys for listening. Best of luck with all your DFS endeavors, and I will see you guys next time.